As Jesus walked along, he saw a man blind from birth. His disciples asked him, "Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind?" Jesus answered, "Neither this man nor his parents sinned. He was born blind so that God's works might be revealed in him. We must work the works of him who sent me while it is day. Night is coming when no one can work. As long as I am in the world, I am the light of the world." When he had said this, he spat on the ground and made mud with the saliva and spread the mud on the man's eyes, saying to him, "Go, wash in the pool of Siloam," which means sent. Then he went and washed and came back able to see. The neighbors and those who had seen him before as a beggar began to ask, "Is this not the man who used to sit and beg?" Some were saying, "It is he." Others were saying, "No, but it is someone like him." He kept saying, "I am he." But they kept asking him, "Then how were your eyes opened?" He answered, "The man called Jesus made mud, spread it on my eyes, and said to me, 'Go to Siloam and wash.' Then I went and washed and received my sight." They said to him, "Where is he?" He said, "I do not know."
They brought to the Pharisees the man who had formerly been blind. Now it was a Sabbath day when Jesus made the mud and opened his eyes. Then the Pharisees also began to ask him how he had received his sight. He said to them, "He put mud on my eyes. Then I washed, and now I see." Some of the Pharisees said, "This man is not from God, for he does not observe the Sabbath." Others said, "How can a man who is a sinner perform such signs?" And they were divided. So they said again to the blind man, "What do you say about him? It was your eyes he opened." He said, "He is a prophet." The Jews did not believe that he had been blind and had received his sight until they called the parents of the man who had received his sight and asked him, "Is this your son, who you say was born blind? How then does he now see?" His parents answered, "We know that this is our son and that he was born blind, but we do not know how it is that he now sees, nor do we know who opened his eyes. Ask him, he is of age. He will speak for himself." His parents said this because they were afraid of the Jews, for the Jews had already agreed that anyone who confessed Jesus to be the Messiah would be put out of the synagogue. Therefore his parents said, "He is of age. Ask him." So for the second time they called the man who had been blind, and they said to him, "Give glory to God. We know that this man is a sinner." He answered, "I do not know whether he is a sinner. One thing I do know, that though I was blind, now I see." They said to him, "What did he do to you? How did he open your eyes?" He answered them, "I have told you already, and you would not listen. Why do you want to hear it again? Do you also want to become his disciples?" Then they reviled him, saying, "You are his disciple, but we are disciples of Moses. We know that God has spoken to Moses, but as for this man, we do not know where he comes from." The man answered, "Here is an astonishing thing. You do not know where he comes from, yet he opened my eyes. We know that God does not listen to sinners, but he does listen to one who worships him and obeys his will. Never since the world began has it been heard that anyone opened the eyes of a person born blind. If this man were not from God, he could do nothing." They answered him, "You were born entirely in sins, and you are trying to teach us?" And they drove him out.
Jesus heard that they had driven him out, and when he found him, he said, "Do you believe in the Son of Man?" He answered, "And who is he, sir? Tell me, so that I may believe in him." Jesus said to him, "You have seen him, and the one speaking with you is he." He said, "Lord, I believe," and he worshiped him. Jesus said, "I came into this world for judgment, so that those who do not see may see, and those who do see may become blind." Some of the Pharisees who were with him heard this and said, "Surely we are not blind, are we?" Jesus said to them, "If you were blind, you would not have sinned. But now that you say, 'We see,' your sin remains."
So when I was teaching guitar lessons in an elementary school in Connecticut, a student in the 3rd grade signed up. Her name was Libby. Her mom, Leslie, came with her to the first lesson and warned me that Libby was extremely withdrawn. She might not talk to me at all during the lesson. She said it wouldn't be my fault, that's just how Libby is. Libby was very quiet during that first lesson, but I gently pushed forward, and whenever I would sense that she started to shut down, I would set that concept aside for later or find a different way to present the information. After a few lessons, Libby did decide to start opening up. She began to talk, and over time, she talked more and more. Leslie would sometimes sit outside the classroom and listen in, and one day at the end, she said, "I think you two did more talking and laughing than actual guitar playing today." I said, "Yes, I think that's true," and braced myself for a reprimand. But Leslie just said, "Thank you." One of my central philosophies as a musician has always been, don't make the music more important than the people. Now, I don't always succeed in that, but in Libby's case, I knew that the person had to be taken care of first, with faith that the music would still find a way through. And all I had to do was not get in the way. You have to get to know the person to know what they need. Maybe some students needed a very disciplined curriculum, but that wasn't Libby. She ended up taking lessons from me for 10 years and did practice often and became a very good guitar player. And she went from coming with a warning, talking about how withdrawn she was, to regularly performing with her school band while she was in high school. But more importantly, the music helped her get a method for dealing with life in general. Libby was having a hard time in school. She was uncomfortable being in any type of system or institution, and her response to that would just be to shut down. So my goal was, for at least this aspect of Libby's life, to help her gain a sense of freedom outside of the systems where she was otherwise so uncomfortable. To see her as a unique person, and not just another student on my attendance sheet. Now, systems and institutions work well for many things, and some of them are necessary in order for us to coexist, at least somewhat peacefully, in the same space. But all systems have the same weakness, and that is that they can't deal with anything that operates outside of that system. Like a 3rd grader with a strong artistic personality that didn't see the world the same way others did. I knew that sometimes other teachers disagreed with how I approached those lessons. This was in a very affluent corner of the Northeast, and parents were paying good money for their kids to learn how to play the guitar. So shouldn't that be what's happening during the lessons? But I've never done a great job of being part of a system either. If we're not careful, systems can dehumanize, erase identity, and ignore any type of exception to those systems. How many times have you dealt with a frustrating situation where a system or institution ends up actually doing harm because they're not able to see past its own rules, when that system can't see the actual people involved? It's all too common. And unfortunately, the church as an institution is not immune to this either. The blind man in today's story was left behind by all the systems around him. His condition forced him into being a beggar, and he would have been used to being completely ignored or reviled. Even the disciples, who had been following Jesus and listening to him all this time, looked to blame the blind man or his family for his situation when they asked the question, so who sinned that this guy was born blind? Because there had to be some reason, right? Their system of faith led them to believe that those who lived in sin got what they deserved, and the righteous, obedient ones were rightfully protected. So therefore, this man or his parents must have sinned in order for him to be in this position. And of course, we still see this type of thinking throughout our society today. But what it does is it lets us off the hook. If the person that's in a bad situation deserves to be there, then we don't have to get our hands dirty by helping them out. They put themselves there, right? But Jesus literally does get his hands dirty. He spits in the mud and rubs it on the blind man's eyes, telling him to go wash. I'm thinking about kids jumping in mud puddles today. Makes me think of my 5-year-old jumping on our unplowed road and all the slush and mud that's on it, and how much fun she has doing it. But as we grow up into adulthood, we tend to see mud less as fun and more as mess. Why is that? Perhaps it's because the systems that we're in have conditioned us to think of anything that's outside of what we consider to be clean and proper as just being messy and counterproductive. But instead, Jesus uses that mess to put over the blind man's eyes to help him see. Jesus is not concerned about what the blind man might deserve or not. He's not even concerned that he's technically breaking the law by healing the man on the Sabbath. What he cares about is the person. And Jesus is the only one that sees the blind man for who he is, not just someone that's supposedly cursed with blindness. And of course, the man comes back being able to see. Systems don't like to be challenged or changed. It goes against their very nature. Think of a strong rubber band that is being stretched. Well, what does it want to do? As soon as the pressure's off, it wants to snap back to its original shape as quickly as it can. That is what we see when systems are stretched. But Jesus is stretching a few of those systems here. Not only does he heal on the Sabbath, but he singles out somebody who was totally ignored by the system and not even on anyone's radar at that point. But it's this man, and not the disciples or the Pharisees, that's the one that is chosen to reveal the light of the world. We've been focusing on questions this Lent, and there are a lot of questions in this passage. But the problem is that those questions come from a place of wanting to validate what they already believe. And so nobody really wants to hear the answers to those questions. And over, the blind man is asked how he got healed. And he gives them the same story every time. But it just doesn't compute for them. The system works for these people, or at least they think it does. They have devoted their lives to studying the laws of this system, and they are certain of their rightness and their place within that system. And it's an easy trap to fall into. I have my own beliefs, and I tend to look at the Pharisees and these type of stories, and I go, well, at least I'm not as stubborn and self-righteous as they are. Which then, of course, makes me a Pharisee too. Even the blind man's parents don't back him up because they're afraid of the system. They don't come to their son's defense. They think it's better to stay within how things are than risk getting excommunicated. And this is how systems gain their control, with the illusion of security and certainty. And it can be hard to let those go. When the Pharisees are challenged in this way, they lash out and they become defensive. They tell a man, "You're just a sinner who was born in sin, and you think you can teach us about any of this stuff?" This is why they just toss him out. And so who else is left? His community doesn't back him up. His parents don't. The Pharisees toss him out. And Jesus is the only one left. Jesus bookends the story. He's there at the beginning to notice him in the first place, and he's there at the end. And when he's talking to the Pharisees, he flips around the power structure, which he does a lot. He says that those who do not see will see, and those who do see will become blind. You think you know exactly what's going on? Maybe you don't. Then he says, if you were blind, you would not have sin. But now that you say, we see, your sin remains. So everyone is thinking of this man's blindness as a curse. And within the systems that he's in, it does seem to curse him. But Jesus is turning it around into something that is holy, without sin. The disciples and Pharisees could physically see, but they're spiritually blind, and they're in denial about it. So every time they say, oh yeah, we see, we know what's going on, it just proves the point. When we are so sure of our rightness that we can't see the people in front of us for who they are, we are in sin. But if we can follow the blind man's example and admit our need for help, we can use the mud and the messiness that it brings to actually help us see. Ironically, the blind man is the only one in this story that does see. He sees Jesus for who he is, when all the others are too busy arguing, trying to validate their own worldview. And that man could have responded to Jesus like the Pharisees did, telling him, there's no way adding mud and spit to my eyes is going to help me see. Just let me get back to my life in peace. But he doesn't do that. He is aware that he doesn't know everything. Our blind spots help us discern what we need to learn. So when I'm performing somewhere on the guitar and I have a good gig one night, I go home and I eat a sandwich or I watch TV. But when I have a rough night and realize that, well, maybe I didn't have all that down as well as I thought I did, I go home and I practice and I study. And those mistakes or rough areas during a performance show me what I need to work on. Without them, I would just think I had it all figured out and wouldn't actually be able to improve at all. So when we get to the end of the story, we're left with a choice. We can live like the majority of the people in this story and perpetuate the systems that we're in because we're too scared to stand up to them, or because we think they work for us, or because we're comfortable in them, all at the expense of others. Or we can live like the blind man, who is secure in his faith that even though he's been abandoned by everyone else, there is someone there who will see him as the person that he was created to be. Now, a majority of the school system where I was teaching was perfectly fine with leaving my student Libby behind. I couldn't change the way that whole system operated, but I could make the decision that for at least 30 minutes a week, Libby could be herself without judgment and would at least know that there was somebody who saw her for who she was. Jesus never had a problem with seeing the exception to the rule when he was dealing with people. The system was never more important than the people within it. And if we're to call ourselves Christians at any time, that is the example that's set for us. So when we fail, when we're blind to somebody or something, the mud will be there to help us clear our sight. Then we can do that same thing for others. If we can let go of the systems that we cling so tightly to and the illusion of control within those systems, we may find that the real freedom and healing is in the light of the world that's been there with us the whole time. Amen.